Hey everyone, and welcome to the second half of June. So this is just where I'm going through some astrological highlights for the latter part of the month, and I may not be doing it in this format going forward. I might just be doing shorter little videos, individual ones for like the different days. So we'll see. I'm experimenting with it. Feel free to let me know what you like best. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're looking at June 17th, and this is when we have the new moon in Gemini. I like this new moon. I feel like this could potentially be a lot of fun. I'm definitely looking forward to being social myself. It feels like a lot of social energy. We have Mercury in its home sign of Gemini, plus that new moon in Gemini is when it, really brings in like the new moon of where the sun sign is. I think when that happens, it really brings in a lot of that energy. And I don't know, I think that this Gemini season, there's just been so much going on that, maybe like myself, you've been wanting to feel that more social, flirty, light, fun kind of energy. And I think this really has the potential to do that. Also because Mercury is in sextile to Venus over here in Leo. And so Venus and Leo with that playfulness and like Venus, that Venusian energy, I just feel like this could be a sexy, fun time, and who doesn't want to have that? That sounds great. That sounds fantastic. But also, it being Mercury with Venus, I think that this has also the potential to give us this feeling of ease in our communications with other people, maybe very like witty banter or really fun, affectionate, flirty types of conversations, or maybe just feeling like there's some ease in your ability to express how you feel or what you're feeling in lovely ways. And, I just think about seeing these together feels like waxing poetic about the universe and life and feelings, and just feels like a lot of fun. And maybe that's because I'm a Gemini rising myself, and so I kind of just have that, but that's brings a smile to my face. It sounds like it's going to be a good time. The one thing I would say is that we have the moon in square to Neptune. So I'd say, yeah, it's a hard aspect. The squares are hard aspects. I would say just one thing to watch out for is that you don't want to maybe check out too much. Like, don't fall into escapism. Don't maybe like overdo that. Watch yourself if you're out having fun on a Saturday night, like watch your cocktails, make sure you get an Uber, that kind of a thing. So just wanting to mention that because, the moon also in a square to Neptune can be like fuzzy perception or blurring our perception, like for our feelings and our intuition. It can make that a little bit fuzzy and cloudy. And so, you want to watch perhaps the tendency if you meet someone out that night, or if you're in a certain situation, to have the rose-colored glasses on and to look at the situation from this perspective where it's like, it could be too good to be true, or too good to be solid. So not that it is too good to be true, whether it's a person or a situation or whatever it is, but you just want to kind of keep that in mind, that there might be this. It reminds me of like overly romanticizing a situation or a person, or, and that doesn't have to be like in the romantic sense. That could be a project, or it could be, an opportunity, whatever it is. So, not to say don't roll with the fun, good times, just to say, hey, maybe bookmark that, keep that in mind so that when you feel more grounded a day or two or so later, that you can look at it plainly and kind of get a sense of what's reality and not. So, okay, great. Let's move on to June 18th. All right, so one more thing about June 17th. I was in editing and realized that something I really wanted to make sure to mention that is key, I blanked on. So I wanted to make sure that I inserted this here. So also on June 17th, we will have Saturn going retrograde. Just get my pen to work here for a second. We'll have Saturn going retrograde in Pisces. So, and it'll be retrograde from June 17th until November 4th, right? So it's a decent period of time. I mean, that's about, the outer planets have longer retrogrades. So like any retrograde, this is about that whole reviewing and revising, and it just has that with Saturnian flavors, right? So you want to look to where Pisces is occupying your chart. So for instance, right here, even though this is a transit chart, we see it's happening in the 7th house, right? So that might be around close committed relationships and that type of thing, right? Or we could see it happening in, let's say, the 10th house, right? If you see it occupying your 10th house, then it would be around, your public roles and career path and that sort of thing. Like, so that's why you want to take a look at your chart and see which of the houses it's occupying, Pisces it's occupying, because that will tell you a little bit more information about what's up for review, right? And, with Saturn, you would think maybe it would be really intense. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be. With any retrograde, it kind of slows down the energy of what that planet is about. And it's meant to give us time to pause and reflect to make sure that we are in alignment, that we're on track, right? And so with this, we're looking at like our commitments, our boundaries, our structures in this area of our life, and just seeing like what is working, what isn't working. And this is a place where you likely have noticed that since Saturn has come into Pisces, that you may have been noticing you've been really dedicated to spending a lot of time or energy on improving this area or really working with the energies in this particular area of your life. And you might come to this point during the retrograde and kind of go, whoa, wait a second. Is this really how I want this structure to go? Is this the plan? Are these plans really what I want? And maybe kind of a little bit of that back to the drawing board, but not in like from ground zero kind of way, just more in a way of wanting to make sure that what you are committing your time, energy, and attention to, what you're dedicated to, what you're putting so much thought into, and like the structures that you're creating are solid, right? You want to, and like every so often you want to make sure that you're not building your house on sand, right? So you're looking at the foundational aspects of things in this area of your life and making sure that, if something is not feeling quite as stable, or you're not really feeling like that's the right structure, or you're finding that things kind of slow things down in a way that give you enough time to pause and see like, oh, this isn't going to be a structure that'll last, stand the test of time, and I need to maybe revise this. It doesn't mean you need to like totally level it, your structures and your boundaries. I mean, maybe for some people, but it just means that there might be some like having to go a different pathway and having to kind of structure things differently as you go forward. And just knowing that, when Saturn again has slowed down, that this area of your life, things might just be going a little bit slower than you really want them to go. So wanted to make sure to mention that, and just to give you the time frame for where we'll be going through this. We've already been in the shadow period, so you've likely seen some of the themes around this coming up since like earlier in the spring. And then, because of the shadow period. And so like after it comes direct on November 4th, we'll see the shadow period. It'll start to taper off. It's not like it's, November 4th, it just boom ends, but we'll start to just see like that energy kind of taper off, and it'll take a little bit for that to start to build up speed. So there you go. Wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. All right, now we can move on. Right, so June 18th, we have a really nice aspect, I think. We have Jupiter in Taurus, and it is sextiling over to Saturn in Pisces. And these two feel together like this, feel kind of like grounded expansion for what we want to create or materialize in this world. Both of these planets, both of them are teachers in their own right who like to dole out their lessons in different ways, right? Like Saturn can be a little bit more stern and strict, and Jupiter to me feels a lot like a philosopher, like a philosophy teacher, right? So Saturn is wanting to like constrict and limit, and Jupiter wants to like expand and really like expand our mind, expand our reality, expand our growth, right? Like expand. And so you can imagine in either direction, too much constriction going in that direction, constricting, going unchecked would not be great, right? And same thing with like expanding with no limits would also eventually get to a point where it's not healthy, not good. So with the two of them being in this sextile, this creates kind of like this more friendly, I feel like a balancing of each other, right? Neither one of them can go unchecked in either direction. It's almost like they've decided to work together and recognize each other's strengths. Like, oh yeah, no, I really appreciate you for, being somebody who creates limits, and that helps me while I'm expanding things. And oh yeah, thanks for expanding things for me, because otherwise I can get really pessimistic and just clamp down on things. So this like really opens things up, and it's like they're agreeing and having a good conversation. So this is actually going to be going on for a few days. So you'll have this energy to work with until June 23rd. The one thing that I would say though is that with this, we have the Sun in Gemini and it is squaring over to Neptune in Pisces. And that could, on this particular day on the 18th, throw a little bit of a wrench in the works in terms of clarity, depending on your chart. Obviously, of course, like it depends on how these are also aspecting your chart. That's why sometimes some things will be more felt by some people than they will by others because of how it's affecting our chart. So, again, this is a collective, we're talking about this on a collective level, so that does change things. But I think overall, some of you might feel this more than others. And this also could look like unrealistic dreams that are going unchecked, a little bit like drifting without a clear direction. It could feel like that, or, like those days, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've definitely experienced days where I'm just kind of like, I don't know why I feel like I'm adrift, like I'm just kind of out of time and my mind isn't really like getting on board with the tasks that I had at hand, on deck for that day. So it could feel a little bit like that, or it could feel also like personal boundaries feel a little bit harder to maintain, right? Because of that dissolving kind of aspect that, or property that Neptune has. And so it might feel like your personal boundaries are harder to create or maintain on that day. So just know that it'll be here for just a little bit. It's not going to be here as long as this beneficial aspect is happening between Jupiter and Saturn. So, if you do happen to notice that, just know that that'll beg off and you'll be able to really, I think, tap more into this beneficial aspect as the days go on as well. So let's move on to the next. So we come to this day that I really want to highlight for us, which is June 25th. So this particular day is one of those days where I'm putting it on my calendar. If I knew somebody that knew about astrology, I would want them to give me the heads up. So I wanted to make sure to include this to give you guys a heads up. So the phrase that keeps coming to mind when I keep looking at the astrology of this day is just misunderstandings abound. And here's why. Let's get into this. So we have Mars squaring off with Uranus, and that is, not only is it a difficult aspect because it's a square, but the two of them in square is just kind of, when it squares off, like think of the energy of Mars squaring off with something like Uranus, and we're talking about chaotic energy, explosive energy, jarring energy, right? Both are really fast and full of energy. So this can be, abrasive. It has the potential for there to be anger or challenges or fights, or we might even see things like people going separate ways. I don't want to scare people with this. Like, my intention isn't to scare people with astrology, right? But we could see something like breakups or separations or things like that happening, right? So you add to that there is a lack of clarity with our mind and mouth coming from this other square that we have between Mercury squaring off with Neptune. So Mercury squaring off with Neptune is, again, it's a square. It's another one of those hard aspects. So usually with squares, the way that I think about this is like the more shadowy aspects, the more difficult aspects of these planets kind of come out and they bump heads together, right? They come up against each other. And so with this, we could see some confusion, mental fuzziness, right? Mercury isn't just about our communication or our writing, it's also about our mind, right? And so when we have them coming together, you can kind of see that there would be some fuzziness, or that we would have inaccurate perceptions and maybe even delusions or illusions, right? Because we are talking about Neptune here, right? So being unable to distinguish fact from story in your head, I think, would definitely be a part of what I would say that could be happening here. So you might not want to trust that what you hear somebody saying is what they're meaning to say, or that you're understanding it clearly. You want to give people, I think, the benefit of the doubt, and give yourself the benefit of the doubt. I see, like, you can see how these squares together here and here can definitely create a lot of misunderstanding. And again, like with the Mercury and Neptune square, I think that communication might be really difficult, but let's not forget that there can also be this deception kind of quality because of illusions and fantasy world and things feeling cloudy or lost, or hidden, that can happen with Neptune when it's more shadowy aspects are kind of coming up, right? So, this is not to go around pointing your finger and being suspicious of everybody in your life, but the potential for there to be deception is present. I can think of this also in the way of like how we lie to ourselves, and how we might, because of the way that we're not being truthful with ourselves, maybe being more deceptive with others in the world, or the world at large, right? So one other thing that I'm going to bring into this is that we have the moon that is opposing Neptune. So the moon is also opposing Neptune. So we have mind and we have emotions, right? This brings a lack of clarity also in that way with our emotions. And I wouldn't necessarily trust that what I'm thinking is what I'm feeling is what I'm feeling clearly, right? That it might feel a little bit more difficult to put your finger on exactly what it is that you're feeling or perceiving. And so again, this is why I said that I look at this and I just think misunderstandings abound this day. I say this more, again, I don't want to use astrology in this way to scare people, but I think it does a disservice when we see something and we don't say like, hey, warning, you might want to be aware on this day. So this is like how I would utilize the energy on this day, and just something that I'm recommending, take it or leave it, is I would definitely hold back on having any kinds of really important conversations till another day. If you are going through a rough patch or on the rocks with, let's say, a friendship or a partnership or a romantic relationship or something like that, and you've just kind of been going through a little bit of a rough patch, this is one of those days where I would say, hey, maybe it's a good idea to kind of like each of you go spend some time with your friends and do something lovely with just your friends, This wouldn't be a time where I'd want to dive into really intense communication or like hash out issues or, because I think that it has the potential to escalate very quickly here with the way things look. So, and again, when people are already a little bit on edge and triggered around like emotions or what they're thinking and feeling about each other and their perceptions, and going through a rough patch like that, this could just blow it up, right? So, and again, like because of that, I think this is like, whether you see this in your life or you see this in people's lives around you, you might notice that people get to this like breaking point, or that there is like just things change on a dime and just suddenly go in a different direction. Like it goes from bickering about some way that things get put away in the kitchen to that's it, I'm moving out, or we shouldn't be together, right? So, and again, not to scare people, but just more to say, hey, if you perceive that might be a thing, maybe today is just not the day, go walk in nature, go do something that is like peaceful, try to do what you can to mitigate that. But I can tell you right now that this is definitely one of those days where I am not having any conversations that are really important or have gravity on this day with anybody. I am certainly going to do my best to watch myself in the way that I take things, like the way that I take what people say or do, or how I'm perceiving or feeling my own feelings or my own thoughts, and whether I'm having a bunch of stories and perceptions and projections and things of that nature. So that's the other thing too with the moon opposing Neptune like this, is that we can project those stories, those feelings onto other people because oppositions are relational, right? So yeah, just wanted to highlight this day for people. It's one of those days where I would be remiss if I didn't say anything. And again, just better if you're aware of things and you can prepare ahead of time. I think that that gives us the best advantage to like really work with things, otherwise we kind of just fall into things. You never know, you could just fall into a conversation. It was a serious conversation, you're like, I could have avoided all of that if I just waited one day, right? So all right, enough about that. Let's move on to the next chart. All right, so I know that this chart says June 29th, which we will mainly be talking about, but I wanted to bring in something that's happening the day before. So the day before, and it'll be continuing on into most of the day into the late afternoon on June 29th. So we'll have the sun and and Saturn are going to be in trine. So that's a lovely aspect, and it's definitely, I think, worth mentioning because, again, it's all day on the 28th and then continuing into the 29th for most of the day. And these two energies together feel like solid, right? It reminds me of the feeling of somebody who's kind of got a hold of themselves. Not necessarily like they've got their shit together, but someone who's got a hold of themselves, right? Feels centered and focused. I think this is going to lend some strength that honestly I'm looking forward to experiencing. So, somebody who, like, in this space, I would imagine feels like they have a healthy sense of discernment and judgment and a healthy sense of their own limits, right? Just like having good judgment overall. So just that's why it reminds me of just this feeling of being supported and feeling a sense of strength and kind of clarity about being able to hold ourselves in the world and feel like we are in alignment with what it is that we're doing, right? Feeling in integrity with what it is that we're up to in this world and being able to have some kind of clarity around that and feel healthy in a way. So that all said, I wanted to mention that again, that's on the 28th, but it will be coming into the 29th and it'll be there for the majority of the day. Now, I wanted to mention that also because throughout the day on the 29th, we have the moon. Even though the moon moves so quickly and it's aspecting so many different planets on a daily basis, they're not all worth mentioning, but I do want to mention a couple of things with this particular day. So we still have the moon is going to be still in a little bit of an opposition, even though it's come off of it by degrees enough, but I feel like there's still a little bit of an influence in this. Like you can see the date or the time that I have this pulled for is for very late in the evening, but this is going to be like these degrees will be much closer earlier in the day. So I know it says 24 and 21, but it'll be much closer to that 21 mark earlier in the day. So I feel like there is that influence that's worth mentioning, and I'll break that down in a second. But then we also have the moon squaring with Venus. And again, the degrees here with 21 and 20 are earlier. So the moon moves so quickly, it's going to be in its earlier degrees of the 20s, like earlier in the day. So don't worry about that. But the reason I want to bring this up is that because of like these aspects happening earlier in the day, I feel like this is one of those days where we might go through some like kind of turbulence with our own emotions in this way. I might not necessarily put all of my trust in my feels on this day. Like, it might feel a little bit unstable, right? Again, we were talking about in one of the other dates that with Uranus, there can be this kind of instability, but when we bring our emotions into that, what that can feel like is like restlessness or maybe erratic or just a little bit unpredictable and maybe disruptive. And then we bring into that this emotional square that we have with Venus. And this is the potential to feel maybe really sensitive or be unrealistic about our attachments and connections to other people in the way that we relate. So there just could be a lot of shifting that is happening throughout the day. So you might notice yourself going through different emotions or like, again, I bring this back to a relational aspect. So there could be this kind of feeling restless or erratic, and I just want to say like maybe not to make decisions from those places. Again, I do feel like because we have from the previous day, we're going to have this trine between Saturn and the Sun, which I think is going to be helpful and stabilizing in that way. But I more so wanted to kind of just like bring that up, that throughout the day there might be some of that happening in the background. Now, the other reason I wanted to pull this chart is that later in the evening, after we have this day that we're having, right, we have Mercury and Saturn are going to be in a trine as well, right? So Mercury and Saturn in a trine. And so I pulled the chart for when they were in their exact trine here. And that, like, I think that at the end of the day, we kind of, because this is going to happen so much later in the evening, I think that we're going to, if you're up, depending on where you are in the world, right, depending on your time zone, I think we could get to the end of our day and have some clarity, like be able to feel like the things that felt intangible, like the feelings that felt kind of elusive, like we couldn't quite put our finger on them, might feel like we can kind of pull them out of the realm of intangibility and actually be able to have some kind of clarity or maybe get a piece of the puzzle to solve whatever issue or problem or something that we were dealing with on an emotional level. So I think we might get some insights here. Remember that Mercury is also a messenger, so I think that it's possible that we can kind of really get all these feelings throughout the day that we're getting, but then also because of the stabilizing factor between the Sun and Saturn, and then also having like Mercury and Saturn happen much later in the day, it kind of bookends this experience, and we get to, I think, have maybe some more clarity. And who knows, depending again where you are, how, if you're a late night owl or where you are in the world, this would be a time where you could actually have certain conversations that feel a lot more clear because of any kinds of realizations that you had as you went through the day. So wanted to bring that up. And then our next chart is going to be our last chart, and we're going to talk about the 30th. All right, so here we are on our last day, June 30th, and a few things to say. Let's start out with the fact that I think that this Friday has the potential to be a fun type of social Friday, just for a couple of reasons. So first, we have the Sun and Mercury are conjunct in a Cazimi. They've both now moved into Cancer, and they are sextiling over to Jupiter in Taurus. Just the sextile alone between these planets feels like it has the potential to bring in some really interesting and expansive types of conversations. The kinds of, life-enhancing, kinds of perspective-enhancing conversations that might provide epiphanies for us. So for me, that feels like social energy. I just picture myself being at a gathering, having conversations with different people. I'm definitely a social butterfly. So for me, this feels like this could have the potential to be a really fun evening full of interesting conversations. And if you've ever just been in conversation with people and found that through that conversation, you go, oh, I think I was supposed to talk to that person tonight because I really got a piece of my own puzzle for myself that I wasn't expecting to get. I feel like it's that kind of a day or that kind of an evening for a Friday. So I like that. That's lovely. So I wanted to make sure to point that out. The other thing that we have is Neptune going retrograde on this day in Pisces. So this will be going on until December 6th, right? And so retrogrades in general, I think, just get this bad rap, but it's because I think it provides, it slows things down in a way that has us need to review and revisit and revise things in a different way, right? Each retrograde for each planet has a little bit of a different feel, but what doesn't change is that there's all the revisioning, reviewing, revising, how we feel, how we think, how we are in certain areas of our life. So you want to take a look at what house occupies your chart for Pisces, so that you have an idea of maybe where in your life you're going to feel this more. And essentially with a Neptune retrograde, it's kind of like the rose-colored glasses come off, right? We have this ability to, because things slow down for us to review them and to look them over, get some insight around our perception of ourselves, of other people, of situations, to see them more clearly, to want to see them more clearly. That's not to say that retrogrades, can't maybe make things feel like the waters get muddied, but I think that by the time we get to the other side of it, it feels like we get some more clarity in these situations to, again, see things as they are, to see ourselves as we are, to see others as they are, to see situations as they are, instead of maybe falling into looking at situations or people for their potential, right? So, and that is the thing with Neptune, we can kind of get really dreamy, right? We can, which is lovely sometimes to be in fantasy world, but sometimes we need to step out of the dreamy world and get a real sense of am I in this situation or interacting with certain people because of their potential and not because of where they really are? Are there things that I've been ignoring or not looking at or not acknowledging? So what's great about this is that it has us be in this place where we can be more honest with ourselves and get clearer vision, so that by the time we get to the other side of this, we can make meaningful decisions that are based on not just our hopes, but on what it is that's really truly aligned with us, with ourselves, right? So just something to keep in mind, is to look at that. And I would also pay attention to, over these next months from here until December 6th, just noticing, where we're maybe not being healthy with ourselves in a mental or emotional or spiritual way, right? So where things are not necessarily healthy for ourselves. And this doesn't, again, have to be just relational. It doesn't have to be about, love and relationships. It can be about work. It can be about situations. It can also be about where we escape, right? We are talking about Pisces and we are talking about Neptune, and that can bring up some of the more shadowy aspects for us to look at, right? To get honest with ourselves about how we move into escapism, whether that's through food or substances or whatever way that we choose to check out in ways that are not healthy. I think checking out is good. We need to be able to do that sometimes. We need to break sometimes, but when it moves into a place of toxicity or moves into a place where it's really not healthy for us and it's really disruptive, it's time to, get real with ourselves about that. So, in all of these ways, that's what you can expect from having that retrograde. And, like I mentioned, I think before in one of the previous ones, it's now we have a couple of planets that are retrograde here, right? So we also have Saturn that's already gone retrograde. We have Pluto that went retrograde early in the month also. So there are different themes that are up, but notice that they're happening in different areas of our life, right? This is nobody's chart. It's just the transit chart. But you can look at your chart and see which house it occupies to give you an idea of where these flavors of reviewing, where they're happening in your life, right? And that'll give you some insight to hopefully help you work with it. The idea with, for me at least, and for some people that I know, is to hear the astrology, to get these kind of heads up about these things, is so that it makes a little bit more sense, but also so that you can work with the energy, so you can really work with it for your own personal growth, for bettering your life, for getting more perspective, for coming out of it with more personal power, for coming out of it with understanding your structures and your boundaries better, to come out of it with more clarity of your perception and what you want to align with, what does fit into your dream world and your fantasy worlds in a healthy way, right? So just some things that I wanted to mention to consider. Last thing I wanted to say about this is that, so I might be doing these videos in, instead of these 2-week increment videos that are time-stamped, I might just be putting out shorter, smaller videos that are a few minutes long, 5 minutes long or something like that, to talk about specific days and certain transits. So astrological highlights, but in little shorter videos that are throughout the month. So I'll have them in a playlist. I think I'm going to experiment with that, with doing it that way. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know which one is going to work better for a workflow and for my life flow. So I'm just experimenting with that. That all said, I wanted to point out that there is something else that is building, and it's right at the end, the transition over into July. And on July 1st into July 2nd, we will have a square that's happening between Venus and Uranus. So there will be a square happening there. And again, that's not on June 30th, but it is happening the next day. And, just wanted to give you the heads up. I don't see why I wouldn't put out a small video about that, but just wanted to give you a heads up that there is that coming up on the horizon. So just in case you don't catch the video when it comes out, I wanted to make sure to mention it here. The energy of the square, like I said, can be challenging, and between Venus and Uranus being, the liberator, the disruptor, the can be restless energy, right? Again, we're talking about some of the more difficult aspects that can come out in squares. We could see possible romantic restlessness, or people really craving the newness, the thrill of newness, and maybe sudden disruptions happening, coming up in close relationships. So, like I would just advise to, like, if you start to feel like that kind of sense of restlessness or that draw towards like the excitement of the new, and you are coupled in a relationship where that doesn't fit into the boundaries of what you guys have discussed, I would say give yourself a couple of days before you make any moves. That's what I would say. I would say just looking ahead, maybe if you're feeling that way, if this feels like it's really coming up for you around that time, maybe put off making any big life-changing decisions for a couple of days until this kind of passes over so that you can make it from a more grounded space. So I just wanted to bring that up. That could bring, some tension up, some friction up inside of relationships as one way that could show up. So again, I say these things not to scare people, just to give you the heads up so you can prepare ahead of time and maybe do some things to mitigate that, right? So that's what I've got for all of the rest of June. If this video has felt helpful or insightful in any way, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell and liking this video. It does help me as I'm continuing to build, and I am going to have a bunch of different kinds of experiments that I'm doing throughout the rest of the year going forward. So thank you for being on this journey and on this ride with me. Thank you for your time as always, and I will see you guys in the next video.